so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Roger Lamb, who's going to talk to you a bit more about the Affordable Housing Webinar Series and our presenters today.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Josh. And thank you to our participants on the line today who are joining our first webinar in the fall series on affordable market housing in BC. So, as Josh mentioned, my name is Roger Lamb. I'm the Manager of Housing Policy with the provincial government. And we'll be supporting hosting the webinar today with the support of Josh and his team here with JPST. And I also want to take just a minute to thank all of our partners who have made the webinars possible over the last year that we've been running these. So we've been working with BC Housing, the BC Real Estate Association, the Canadian Home Builders Association of BC, the Union of BC Municipalities, the Urban Development Institute, the Ministry of Community, Sports, and Cultural Development. So I'd like to thank them all for the collaboration, as well, again, to thank the Economic Development Division of the Ministry of Jobs, Tourism, and Skills Training for the technical support. And obviously, without them, we wouldn't be doing this webinar series with you folks.
Happy to work with you.
So the goal of the series, we know that affordable market housing is a key concern for many communities across the province. And it's also a concern for industry, housing stakeholders, families, and individuals as well. And so we started this webinar series with the goal of sharing information with provincial audience to support and encourage the creation of affordable market housing options in the province. So the webinar format is a way of doing this that hopefully will make it easy and cost-effective for everyone to participate who wants to. We know that a lot of folks that are joining, particularly on this call today, are probably out in the region, and it's hard to travel and to make it to conferences. So we want to make this information as available as possible for you. As well, the webinars build on the momentum of so many different housing initiatives that go on across the province every year, such as the Housing Affordability Symposium offered by the Canadian Home Builders Association of BC annually. So the series topics. We've organized 3 webinars for our fall 2014 series. In today's webinar, we're looking at housing issues in communities experiencing rapid industrial growth with a focus on the north. As usual, we'll have 2 speakers, and we'll follow our presentation with questions and discussions towards the end. Well, and actually, as Josh mentioned, we'll try to take a few questions during the course of the presentation as well, just if, as they come up and there's some logical breaks in the presentation. Our next webinar is on October 30th, and we're going to look at how to support rental housing in your community. And if you've seen our previous advertisements, you'll notice we've changed the date. We originally had it posted for October 23rd, but we've now moved that to October 30th, so just update your memos if you have them. Our final webinar on November 27th is going to look at strategies to overcome neighborhood resistance to infill and to densification as well. So, I'd just like to, spend a few minutes to introduce the topic that we have today. It's industrial growth. It's a hot topic in many regions of the province, but in particular in the northwest and northeast of the province. We all know that we need industry to provide jobs for our citizens, support our local economies, our social programs, and government services. We know that slow growth is something that's easier to plan for, it's something that we can predict, and we can manage it and work with our communities to anticipate and also respond to that type of growth. But when we face rapid growth, the scenario becomes quite different. It's more, the growth is accelerated, we have to make decisions in a more expedient manner, and there's different solutions that we need to look at. Fortunately, there's a number of communities across the province and across the country and around the world who've also experienced rapid growth, so we're able to learn from the experiences. So the topics for this, we gave a lot of thought really to who to invite to this particular webinar because we wanted to give a more rounded perspective of how communities can look at the challenge of rapid industrial growth. So we have invited a local government planner who has had the experience of the last few years of really working with community and industry and a whole range of partners to plan for that type of growth, as well as industry itself and how they have responded, planned, worked, anticipated, and I guess at the end of the day are working with the community to respond to the rapid growth that they're a part of. So it's my pleasure really to introduce our two speakers, Gwendolyn Sewell and Elliott Smith. Gwen is the Director of Community Planning and Development with the District of Kitimat. She's trained as a geographer. Gwen was introduced to social, recreation, and park planning through a series of contracts with the BC agencies and also self-employed consultants, and with a Vancouver-based engineering firm that worked in the Northwest Territories and West Africa. After several years of practical experience, Gwen has enrolled as a graduate student at UBC's School of Community and Regional Planning. Upon completion, Gwen started work as a municipal planner in Kitimat, in what has proven to be a delightful Radburn-style Greenbelt community. And if none of you had the opportunity to go up to Kitimat, I strongly encourage it. As a planner, it's really a fantastic community to see, and to see that type of a plan actually take place and actually in the real world. The vision of Master Planner Clarence Stein is ever present in the community. It helps residents appreciate and support community planning. Typical for a small northern BC office, planning work in Kitimat is varied. When the local economy was suffering, planning was about mitigating the impact of decline. The current focus is managing a community on the edge of a new economy and the impact of what appears to be a significant economic boom and a radically different housing market. Gwen met Elliott Smith in July 2013. They found a mutual acquaintance in Roger Wilcox, who was an executive assistant to Clarence Stein during the Kitimat Town Site Plan projects from 1948 to 1952, and a key figure in the U.S. cooperative housing movement. I'll also introduce Elliott Smith, who has worked in international real estate and project management through his 30-year career. He brings broad experience across the NGO, government, and for-profit sectors in more than 45 countries. A graduate of Ohio Wesleyan University, Elliott started out with the U.S. Peace Corps and State Department in Yemen. He went on to work with the Cooperative Housing Foundation and local initiatives to support corporation in the U.S. and high-tech companies including AOL and Cisco Systems when he launched their international operations in major European and Asian markets. Elliott has been with Shell since 2000, working on a variety of projects. He is now the real estate development and delivery manager for the LNG Canada project in British Columbia, based in Vancouver. Gwen and Elliott have prepared this presentation jointly, and so they're going to be sharing, Gwen will be sharing her local government perspective, Elliott his industry perspective, and so thank you, and I'll pass it over to our presenters.
So thanks for that, Roger. And Elliott and I are in the same room today, so we're not quite sure how the camera is going to track going back and forth between the two of us, but we hope you'll find an engaging conversation. And I think at some points we might confuse the camera as we both try and talk at the same time.
I think we've confused the camera already at this moment.
That's okay. So we're just going to show you an overview slide that kind of reviews what our presentation will cover today. And as Josh mentioned, we're prepared to take some questions as we proceed. So I think basically we'll talk about the context of Kitimat and Shell Canada, LNG Canada's project in particular. We'll talk a little bit about the housing situation in our community over the last 2.5 decades. We'll talk about the focus of the current planning work in Kitimat, which is really much about policy development and response to the level of investor interest and the level of community concern with respect to densification issues.
Okay. I'd like to just start briefly by saying where we are coming to this project from LNG Canada. We have a very strong parent in Shell and our other three partners on this project. South Korea's KOGAS, China's PetroChina, and Mitsubishi Corporation. And the tradition on our projects, both together and separately, has been to really engage with the community from very early in a project. So we are a formal joint venture with four roughly equal partners. But on behalf of those partners, as Gwen mentioned, I first came to Kitimat in the first half of 2013. And the first stop, of course, was to look at what does the community want, as illustrated in their community planning and zoning. So I showed up raising my hand and saying, okay, so we have to do some things. How can we do that according to the community's wishes? If you'll switch to the next slide, please, or am I able to do that, Josh?
Yeah, you're driving, Elliott. Those two blue buttons there, those will advance your slides. Down in the bottom left-hand corner.
I don't think we see a blue button, Josh.
Two blue arrows, 1 points up, 1 points down. You should see 12 out of 42 beside it in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen.
Now it's got it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So this was the slide I was talking to a moment ago. These are the four partners working together in LNG Canada. Shell headquartered in the Netherlands, South Korea's Kogas, PetroChina, and Mitsubishi. I'm not going to torture you with a propaganda video at the moment. But you may want to, when you take a copy of the slide, go and look at these YouTube slides, presentations. They basically just kind of explain the technical aspects of the project. And of course, today we're talking about the impact on the community. So this is less important to you, but if you are interested, this might be useful for you. Just kind of walks you through what happens in an LNG product, where our product is coming from, how it's manufactured, and how it's shipped to the end customers overseas. Why did we end up in Kitimat to build an LNG project? You all read in the press of 13, 14, 15 different projects that aspire to do LNG projects. We do our siting quite carefully. And the things, probably the top four things that attracted us is the industrial zoned land. We would not have to go in and clear away virgin forest, for example. The ice-free year-round port. Positive relationships with the local governments, plural. That's a nod to Terrace as well, and a great existing infrastructure. Now here I have to apologize for this slide. It says Terrace Airport. Now we all know it's Northwest Regional Airport, but I neglected to correct this slide when I picked it up. So Terrace, my apologies. This is a regional airport, and I'm aware of that. The other part of the infrastructure is the road and sea infrastructure. And I heard a comment many times when I first came to Kitimat, hey, we're at the end of the highway. And I keep correcting people for the last year, well, wait a minute, aren't you at the beginning of the highway? So that's a little bit of a perspective on things a little bit. The next slide is simply an artist's rendition of our site model, where we expect this LNG facility to go. And it's basically a giant refrigerator that shrinks the gas down about 600 times, but you have to chill it and then load it in ships. So we've selected a site that sits alongside of RTA, our industrial partner in Kitimat, in such a way that we don't go out and use up a lot of greenfield land. We're using land that is already industrially zoned, and that's, of course, very attractive for environmental reasons as well as development reasons.
I think that there's one other point that I want to make with respect to the site, and that is that this is the former site of a methanol and ammonia plant. And plant, or those two plants, employed about 120, 125 people. And we expect that the LNG Canada project will employ about between kind of 80 and 280 more people than that plant. Okay, so something in the order of 200 to 400, and those numbers are yet to be determined. So I think from the community's perspective, the key issues really are housing availability and need. We've gone through a fairly significant council and community education process over the last 2 years in particular. We began in March 2012 with our first housing needs assessment study. That was done by a consultant based in Vancouver. And we shared the results of that study quite extensively, both with council and people that were intimately involved locally with a variety of social service networks and agencies. And those key people began thinking initially about potential partnerships to build appropriate and affordable housing for some people that are considered the special populations, people that are perhaps more challenging to house or that have unique needs. Since then, however, so since March of 2012, there's been a huge change in the housing market, and you'll see some slides as we move forward in this presentation that show you the nature of that change. And for the first time, there's significant new developments on the horizon, both in terms of housing and industrial activity. And many individuals who are especially vulnerable have lost their housing during this time of kind of economic development.
Or at the very least fear they're going to lose their housing.
Yeah, correct, Elliott. And so there's a big push now to address the fears and the realities and take advantage of some opportunities to perhaps create some special purpose housing. So in March of 2012, we determined that about 217 housing units were needed. And earlier this year, Daniel Martin, who's the planner in Kitimat, completed an in-house update of the 2012 report. So inserting 2011 census data into the old document, we now calculate that probably 275 units are needed. And that's still a number that's in flux, because in response to housing pressure and the reality of rising rents and decreasing availability of units, we perhaps lost people from this special population, and it's been challenging somewhat to document the level of change. So although it's not a huge number if you're from a larger center, it's a very new issue for our community. And rents, both types of housing have been very accessible in Kitimat economically. We've had historically fairly low rents or very low rents in relation to other centers in the province. And home ownership has also been extremely affordable. And I think that the last time we kind of had a period of comparable industrial construction was the last time we had really low vacancy rates and high housing prices. So in 2012, there was a number of kind of specific municipal actions that were identified in the plan. And you can read all about those on this slide, so I'm not going to run through them individually. I think what's significant is the red checks indicate projects that have been essentially completed or work that has been completed. Yellow is work that is currently ongoing. It's quite important. And I think that Roger Lamb may choose later to speak more specifically about the business plan, which is now being a housing action plan that's being conducted even as we speak. And we're looking for the results of that within the next few weeks. And the squares show you what's next. So we certainly have some work to do in terms of measuring homelessness and also with respect to adopting policies in our official community plan.
Yeah, are there any questions at this point? We can do questions at the end, but if somebody has a question now, this would be a good break point. Okay, hearing nothing, I'll move on. So LNG Canada is obviously extremely interested in how these issues with housing and available stock play out in the community. And it's not in our benefit at all to have these issues spin out of control. So we want to make sure that everything that we do to develop our project takes into account the type of concerns that Glenn just outlined. At the very least, we have a responsibility to not make anything worse than it is at the moment. But I think by properly planning our strategy, we can actually quite help to improve things. So we look at housing affordability and availability as it is today. And we think what are the investments that we're making in the community can help to mitigate or lead to some positive change in some of those areas. But we're doing that in sort of three pillars, if you will. One is that we're making sure that we have a workforce accommodation village where our construction workforce, some of which will be local and some of which will fly in from elsewhere in Canada and perhaps beyond. We want to make sure that they are housed in a community that that's a comfortable, great place for them to live. Second, we want to work with developers to create new housing for any LNG staff that are located in the community. And those would be people that come to the community with their families for 4 or 5 years. They might have young children or be empty nesters. That would be typical for our large projects. But we very much want those people to be integrated into the community. And then the third is supporting the Kitimat Housing Action Plan. I've been sitting in on the community housing meeting for the last half a year or so, and I have to say, having done a lot of urban development and redevelopment and community development, this is probably one of the brightest groups of people I've seen gathered around a table to try to solve some common problems. So there's a lot of talent in Kitimat now and in BC that can be brought to bear to make sure things work well.
Okay, so here's kind of where we started, and here's where we are today. So we started looking specifically at kind of our historic population pattern and what we might be facing as kind of one of these 4 scenarios emerge in terms of industrial growth. So each of these lines on the right-hand margin represent an alternative future for Kitimat. So the white line is what will happen if we don't have any new development. The blue and green lines indicate what will happen with either 1 or 2 fairly significant liquefied natural gas plants. And the top line represents what would happen if the Kitimat Clean project went forward. So that's a refinery project, not specifically tied to any particular oil pipeline, but the refinery proposal would potentially involve 3,000 direct jobs and a number of spin-off jobs as well. And for purposes of our projection, Kitimat's projection, we'd assume that those jobs will be split equally between Terrace and ourselves, as the plant is located midpoint between the 2 communities. And so this graph represents sort of kind of seat of the pants calculations based on an economic base model, which is an appropriate model to use for a town powered by an export economy. Okay, the second graph here indicates sort of how the writing kind of emerged on the wall with respect to rental accommodations in particular. So you can see that 10 years ago, our rental vacancy rate went in the 40%. There was a bit of a spike, kind of a slow decline, and then a bit of a spike associated at the time of a fairly significant plant closure, when 535 industrial jobs were eliminated in the pulp and paper industry. And now, at the bottom end of the graph, we're pretty much at 0. So the reduced inventory, or rather the reduced available inventory, is really a significant problem. And the turnaround happens very quickly. So over the course of just over 4 years, we went from kind of 30% to basically 0. And it's hard for a community to adjust that quickly. So average rents in Kitimat are now comparable to what you pay in Vancouver. They're just over $1,000 a month. You might get more square footage in Kitimat than you do in Vancouver, but still you're paying out of pocket for about the same amount. And you can pay up to $3,200 a month for a furnished unit with a cleaning service. And that's really a market that has been driven by living out allowances. They're paid by some projects, or they're paid periodically when the existing temporary workforce facilities are full. So I think what we've learned going forward is that you want to make sure you have sufficient capacity to house the temporary workers so that the community can respond with permanent housing.
So this graph is highly interesting to LNG Canada. So if we're being a responsible corporate citizen and want to make sure we don't displace anybody, How do you do that if your vacancy rate is at 0? So that tells us we need some action. But this graph and the previous versions I've seen of it kind of took my breath away. You're not in crisis yet, but you can see it coming if you don't behave properly.
But the other thing this graph tells you is that, when we had a 44% vacancy rate, when companies started coming to us at the very early and preliminary stages of their project development, it was clear that there needed to be some component of a living out allowance being paid, because we wanted to kind of share the benefit and not necessarily have all the temporary workers arriving and staying in construction camps when there was 600 units of available rental market housing that was kind of on the market and available. And kind of this is also this existing situation, the high initial vacancy rates and the low current rental vacancy rates creates market opportunities for renovation within that type of housing as well. So that's the next slide now. So this is sort of the Kitimat version of renovations of multifamily housing. And Elliott and I have an interesting take on this because, of course, the extent of work varies significantly building to building.
Yeah, so there are units being renovated. But no offense to the owners of this building, if they happen to be online. These are occupied buildings with happy people in them. However, I question when I look at these particular units in person or in a picture, how deep is this renovation really? So it's new siding, it may be some new insulation in windows, certainly new interiors on the units. But is this refreshed a unit built in the 1960s to a place where it's going to be a solid piece of infrastructure for the community for another 30 or 40 years? And just on face value from this type of light renovation, and knowing that there are issues like asbestos and that sort of thing as well, I question whether this is a deep enough renovation to truly renew the stock in a community.
And so what we're finding from the building inspector's standpoint and kind of the community standpoint is some of the units and some of the buildings have been renovated extensively. So their insulation is being removed and asbestos is being addressed. In other units and in other buildings, the renovation has been a lighter treatment overall. And so that's critically important because we don't know for certain that there's the same level of renovation unit to unit and building to building within each of these larger multifamily properties. So there could be multiple buildings on one site, or in some cases there's been subdivision approval and there's one building on one lot, but they look like a complex. So it still looks like one facility.
The other,
just kind of finish that thought. It's critically important to understand the level of renovation of individual units when you're dealing with strata property applications for buildings or for units within a building, because we definitely want to ensure that a new owner of a property is taking on a project that they'll be capable of living in and capable of getting a mortgage for, which requires a 35-year life.
So the other thing to point out through this slide is both of these buildings are 100% occupied right now. In order to renovate one to whatever level, you have to empty them. There is also no place for those people to go while things are being renovated. So the renovations themselves create some more pressure.
At the same time, what we have happening is we're finally starting to get some serious interest in new multifamily development. That's quite new for Kitimat. It's a very new topic for our council to be wrestling with. The projects are primarily strata-titled units, ground-oriented, although there's also some apartment buildings that have been proposed. And council is starting to face tremendous pressure from existing residents to turn down applications seeking any increase in density. And I think if many citizens had their way, there would be no or minimal new construction. Housing values in Kitimat have soared, and we'll see a couple of slides that demonstrate that. Not quite yet, but close. And there's definitely homeowner interest in capturing that increase in value. So here's where we're at in terms of permanent population versus dwelling unit demand. And again, this speaks to the four scenarios that that were outlined earlier with individual projects, and they're all identified on the margins of the slide. So looking kind of 2 to 5 years out, I believe Kitimat will definitely need new dwelling units. We'll need a kind of a chunk more than we have today. And this graph overall represents kind of our department's best guess as to demand associated with each of the projects and also the cumulative impact. What remains completely unknown is the timing. We don't control the final investment decision process. We have to be ready to respond to that. And given the lead time to develop housing, you need to be ready in advance. So you have to have your sites identified. Developers may even want to have preliminary plans approved. They may want development permits in place before they actually go to market and pre-sell units, so that their risk of investing in our kind of economy is somewhat minimized. And that's, I think, the other reason behind the stratification applications. They want to, again, spread the risk of owning a building that's 40 or 50 or 60 years old and might be 100% occupied tomorrow, but if there is no final investment decision, will not have that same level of occupancy going forward.
So, given that background of what the marketplace looks like in Kitimat, and to an extent in Terrace as well as that applies, we say, okay, how can we come into this market with a bulge of demand and not negatively affect either end of the housing spectrum? So you don't want to affect the value of existing homeowners. You don't want to make it skyrocket or plummet or have a boom bust kind of cycle. So we've developed a strategy that we think will mitigate many of the problems. There will be no impact, but we're hoping to keep it very, very positive. I think I've gotten my slides slightly out of order here. So I'm going to, so our objective is to limit displacement of existing residents as a first principle. That maybe doesn't mean zero because there's no place to go to renovate, but I think we can keep it extremely low. Our approach will be to cause the creation of some new stock in the community that's suitable for the families we'll be bringing in. But at the same time, not overbuilding so that we don't create an oversupply situation that, you know, as real estate values sort of go off the cliff at the end of the current industrial cycle. And the other thing is to make absolutely certain we're integrated into the community. So if you were to look at one of the slides we have coming up at the different neighborhoods inside of the District of Kitimat, we expect to be in almost all of them. There will be no gated community that's just LNG employees and their families. This has got to be part of the community. And I'm going to go back just one slide there. So we know we're going to need a limited number of residential units. And there's been a lot of expectation and speculation in the marketplace that will be hundreds and hundreds of units. And in fact, in our first batch, we're only going to go out for around 125 units to be leased. Those units are houses, condominiums, and apartments, depending upon the family size and seniority and school needs of each of our residents. That's not a huge number of new units, but it is a huge number of units when you look at the size of the community overall. The people living in these will be our senior staff and the senior staff of our lead consultants helping to build the project. But largely family-based. Everyone else will be in the workforce accommodation village, which is over in the industrial area, as it should be based on the community planning for Kitimat. We're going to lease those units in 5-year blocks, and we won't take them all at once. So that means between 2015, 2016, 2017. We'll start to ramp up towards the number of 125 with a potential upward adjustment, but it won't be significantly more than that. Because we're taking some in, say, the end of 2015 and some in the beginning of 2016, that means that when we've completed our build of the LNG plant, we'll also be releasing them back into the marketplace in a staggered manner, not dumping several hundred units all at the same time. And we hope that that serves to protect both the low-income and special needs part of the community, as well as people that own their homes. We are tendering for these in a request for proposals now, so I can't talk about that too much, but I can tell you that we've gone out to 12 or 13 different private developers, some of whom have applied for permissions in Kitimat already, as well as to do some housing with the Haisla First Nation. It's very much meant to be a balanced situation without having any party take an incredibly large chunk of the development benefits, if you will.
And I think what we're hoping too is that some of those kind of units that are built specifically for LNG Canada construction will transition to LNG Canada operations, or to other people that are coming in to operate other new facilities that are built during this current boom. So they may be construction initially, but they should be operational jobs later.
Yeah.
So we're taking some kind of steps in terms of policy to encourage operational positions to be based in our community, as opposed to the kind of fly-in, fly-out approach.
Yeah, and we'll be providing the keys to the front door for our staff that are there during the construction period. Which ends up around 2020, 2021, 2022, depending on the phasing. But when it becomes operational, people will make their own economic decisions of whether they're going to live in Terrace or they're going to live in Kitimat, whether they'll be in an apartment or an acreage outside of town somewhere. It goes back to a more normal basis. So we're hoping that as we return these rental units to the market, the owners then either sell or rent them back out to people that are making their own individual family choices. Now, I originally had a map of Kitimat in this slide with 12 or 13 places where we were interested in, but our contracting and procurement team tells me that wouldn't have been appropriate at this moment. So I've given you a representational map here. But you can trust that we're spread out around the community.
Okay, so here's just two slides kind of giving you a sort of a flavor of what's been happening in our housing market over the last few years. And so I think that there's been just phenomenal increase in assessed value, and those are reflected in phenomenal sale values. And I think the fact that this has sold for almost $200,000 over the current assessment is an indication of sort of what's been really going on. And it's not just homes that are selling at prices like this. Building lots, the next slide, are facing similar pressure. So it's kind of an untenable situation. We don't quite know where it's going to lead over the next little while, but I think most people are kind of fairly assured that we cannot continue to move in this direction. And it's led to more lots coming onto the market quicker from existing subdivisions that have had historically a 20-year projected build life, just ones that they're kind of gearing themselves up to basically complete those projects within the next 2 to 3 years.
And think about this. This is caused just by the anticipation of new projects. For the part of LNG Canada, we haven't even put a shovel in the ground yet, and already we see movement. We see, or Kitimat has seen some eviction notices as people prepare to try to take advantage of the property that they own, but that has unanticipated effects on current population. So this is 2 years before we're really fully into full construction mode, and we're already seeing this kind of value changes.
So this goes back to the fact that we have had one fairly significant industrial project going forward, and that's the Rio Tinto Smelter Modernization project. So that's over a $4 billion construction project. It's got a fairly significant workforce, and we'll show you sort of the general location of that work camp and what that meant for our community.
So we talk about the size of impact on the community. So RTA's modernization project had somewhere between 2,500 and 3,500 workers at any given point. We expect around an average of 5,500. But really, you need to plan. Again, being a responsible corporate citizen, you need to plan to be able to handle some fluctuations in that as construction speeds up or slows down. So we're actually planning a range for our workforce accommodation village of between 4,500 and 7,500. We'll build to the lower end to start with, but the sewage, the water, the electric, which we have to supply ourselves, the District of Kitimat does not have capacity for sewage treatment in this at this level at the moment. But we really have to plan to be flexible, because if we're not, and we reach a peak in capacity and we turn workforce loose on the community to find their own accommodations, you get this very sharp shock of negative numbers in vacancies and places where people can live, and an unexpectedly rapid rent and price increase. And again, at the operational phase, it's hard to predict exactly, but somewhere between 200 and 400 full-time permanent operational jobs and contractors around them. We don't say an exact number. We say a range. I think we have a pretty good idea that we're about in the middle to upper end of this range. But these are things that flesh out as technology develops and we learn how to run this particular facility. So forgive the range and the approximate values, but we'd be irresponsible to mention an exact number at this point.
So here's kind of the big picture in terms of what we're looking at with respect to both industrial construction, temporary workers, and permanent industrial labor force. And it also gives you an indication of what our typical housing construction rate has been, and that's not 45 dwelling units a year, that's 4.5 dwelling units a year over the last 20 plus years. This building season, and because it's a northern community, our building season is quite compressed. You really can't build a house in Kitimat in December, January, or February, and even November and March can be extremely challenging. So we'll have 70 new homes built this year. We don't yet know what 2015 will bring. I suspect it will be significantly more than that, both in response to general level of interest and investor confidence that several projects will go forward in Kitimat. So I think there's now, two very significant LNG projects proposed, and I believe 4 additional LNG projects that are on the public record. And of course, there's always projects that are not yet public that the economic development folks are dealing with. So in capturing everything with respect to the construction scenario, we may well end up in a situation where we have more people living in temporary construction camps than we have permanent residents of our community. And that will certainly have some impact. And we've taken some steps to try and mitigate that, and counseling industrial proponents ways that they can help us address that situation as well. So really the municipal focus is on the permanent labor force and the number of housing units that we'll have to have in place for long-term residents of our community. And overall, we feel fairly confident that scenario 2 or 3 is going to be the likely outcome of the current level of investor interest. And so that puts us close to what our historic high is in terms of industrial jobs, and that translates again to population. What is different now is because the average household size has shrunk significantly from about 3.5 to 2.3 or 2.4, we still know that we need significantly more dwelling units to accommodate the same population. So there's a big gap up if the Kitimat Clean project goes ahead. But certainly in terms of being close to kind of 3,100, 3,000 permanent industrial jobs, In 1981, we also had almost no retirees in Kitimat, and now we have a large number of retiree families. So we're a community that's aging in place, and I think that that reflects, in part, the nature of housing that will be needed by our community as we go forward. So ground-oriented housing is appropriate, and apartment buildings with elevators are also equally significant.
I would just make one last comment about this slide, and that is you could, in scenarios 2 and 3, end up with a similar set of numbers. But since you talk about 4.5 new houses a year, there's a need in this part of the cycle to renew housing stock. And I think the market is going to do that, and I hope that we're able to foster that a little bit.
So purely from the temporary housing perspective, this is kind of where we're at currently. So the present temporary worker facilities are shown there in yellow. The potential are shown in pink, and LNG Canada, Elliott has specifically spoken to you about that already. And the approved temporary workforce counts are shown in white. So there's a fairly significant camp housing 2,154 people. That has zoning approval and has a development permit. It's under construction now. It will be a phased project, again, scheduled to meet demand and to help manage the peak labor forces for the individual proponent construction camps. And those are basically the pink ones that will be over on the west side of the Kitimat Valley. So that is somewhat removed from the town site proper. The camp that's currently in place for the Rio Tinto modernization project is a 1,780-person camp, plus a vessel housing approximately 600 people that's anchored in Kitimat Harbor, or rather tied up to an existing wharf in Kitimat Harbor. And so there's the Kitimat River, there's the M1 manufacturing zone, and there's a large green belt that divides those large temporary camps from the balance of the town site. And the exceptions are the two camps, the two smaller camps, the 2,154, which is managing the peak, and also a 1,000-bed camp that's proposed, but not yet at the same level of approval as the camp that's the coastal and downtown area.
So we've, as LNG Canada, taken how we develop our workforce accommodation village very, very seriously. You'll see two illustrations below. One illustration is a 4,500 person facility, and the second is what it would look like if it was built out to 7,500. Getting these type of facilities right, making sure that your workforce is well fed, happy, has good recreation after work, and well rested, makes all the difference in the world to the kind of impact that these people have on the community. And from a purely selfish corporate point of view, it also makes them want to stay. We need a very highly skilled workforce. If they get sick of the place that we've provided for them to live and go away, that's a tremendous problem for us. So we want to make sure people feel happy and comfortable while they're there. We're intending to build a accommodation village that is not only the best in Canada, but is probably going to be the largest in Canada at this moment, even at its smaller size. I put this slide up basically to give you a little bit of an idea of how we plan a workforce accommodation facility. You can kind of ignore the impossible to read fine print and look at the icons here a little bit. So we've talked to the crafts in Canada and specifically in BC. We've talked to people that are living in the Alberta tar sands facilities to see how they feel about their things, the places where they're living. And we know the things that are most important to people. Having their own bed and bath and a decent but not terribly expansive room. So we're talking about 150 square feet or 15 square meters with its own bathroom. So you have some privacy and comfort when you're not working. We need to worry about things like laundry, and laundry for industrial wear as well as people's personal stuff. That people can move between our work site and the accommodations by foot, or if they choose to by shuttle bus, and keeping the impact off of the community's roads. A good dining experience, really good food, both in what they take to the site for lunch, their mid-shift meal in any day, what they're getting in the evening and for breakfast, how good their cup of coffee is, all those things that are kind of tangible ways that we can keep a workforce happy and well taken care of. We have to supply storage. You're going to.
I was just going to say that I think this is one instance where there was an interesting conversation around potential location for the work camp. So this particular camp is of the scope and scale that its footprint is almost comparable to what a whole new neighborhood would be in Kitimat. So we have a very carefully crafted community plan for each of our significant residential neighborhoods hold between 2,900 and 4,000 people. We have 3 town site neighborhoods now. This is potentially the same size as a new neighborhood. So the plan in the 1950s identified potential new neighborhoods should Kitimat reach a level of growth where it made sense to develop a new neighborhood. But because this is going to be a temporary facility, and we don't know long-term that we will need permanent housing for 3,000 residents, it didn't make sense to go ahead on that model. So for that reason, it makes much more sense for LNG Canada and for some of the other players to put the work camp very proximate, very close to their construction sites. And I think, Elliott, you actually expect people will want to walk to work. They won't even ride buses.
Yeah, well, we've surveyed a lot of the people on the RTA modernization site, and about 50% of the folks that I've talked to absolutely insist on walking to site. So we have to provide the walking routes. About 50% are not going to go anywhere unless we put them on a shuttle bus. Better yet, a personally chauffeured vehicle. But people are really quite set in their ways. Me, I would be in the walk outside part of things, but I think we need to provide that choice. I can go on for a lot of hours about these icons, so I won't do that to you. But I want to mention just 1 or 2 quick other items. The ability for people to be able to store things, and the ability for them to be able to get back and forth to town when they want to go to the drugstore, when they want to go to the grocery store, when they decide, you know what, I've eaten in our dining room 6 nights in a row, I want to go out to dinner. So we want these people to have access to the community. We want it to be separated enough so that when everybody's on their way to work, the residents in Kitimat can still go out and buy bread and milk and eggs and aren't blocked up by hundreds of buses at the moment. So really quite key to have our camp located as closely as we can to our plant site. So I just want to summarize a few things and make one more point about medical services. In order to minimize the impact on the community, we want to make sure that this is full-service, self-contained accommodation. We need to be able to supply our own sewage, water, solid waste. Everything will be recycled. What needs to go to landfill has to be carefully coordinated with where it's shipped to. We're hoping to minimize that. And incidentally, to work together with the local cooperative recycling agency to try to get some volumes available so we can get materials shipped for recycling. We're not going to allow personal vehicles to be parked and used at site. The last thing I think anybody needs right now is 5,000 pickup trucks parked on the side of the road. So this will be mandatory even for our more senior employees. They'll come into parking lots, perhaps one near the regional airport, perhaps one just outside of the District of Kitimat, and maybe another one in the center for people that are locally housed in Kitimat. And from there, they'll take shuttle buses into the site. I said I wanted to mention one more thing about medical. We've been linking in a lot with BC Northern Health. We're quite aware that at the impact this number of people would have on the local housing or the local healthcare system. So we will be building a full medical clinic inside of our facility to keep as much pressure off of the doctors and hospitals in the region as possible. That doesn't mean we'll never use them, but the day-to-day healthcare of our workforce will be taken care of on the site. And then last thing would be amenities. So we will have recreation on the site, things like jogging paths, bike paths, sports fields outside, gyms and recreation facilities. And on food and beverage, we are planning a wet camp facility. This is often a topic of some debate. We'll allow controlled access to beer and wine, hopefully in the same facility where we're offering a normal meal. Trying to ban responsible consumption of beer and wine on a site of this size is quite impractical, and it just drives people sort of underground with their habits. We'd much rather have this be a healthy part of wrapping up the end of your day or your work week in a controlled way. So we made a fairly conscious decision to keep it that way. Again, people can still choose to go out to a restaurant in the community in the evening, but we want to keep that as a fairly balanced pastime rather than an overwhelming stress on the community.
Okay, so the focus of our municipal effort over the past as well has been understanding the scope of potential impact from this collection of proposed projects. And what we've been looking at in the last few slides is focusing on one project. Well, I think the proposal is probably one of the more mature ones, but still many, many months away from making a final investment decision. And so one key activity for our municipal staff has been a fairly intensive education program, and that's both focused on council and focused on the community. So we spent a little bit of time documenting the existing supply, and so you'll see the four central neighborhoods. The cable car area is a rural area, it's about 6 kilometers from downtown. The Cadell, Nechako, and Whitetail neighborhoods are the three primary neighborhoods in our community. So we're looking at adding density within the footprint of the existing dwellings wherever possible. It's a lower cost option, and it certainly makes more sense in terms of supporting transit services and the existing extensive collection of walkways and interior walking paths and interior parts of our community. And we're also trying to take advantage of the potential that's operated by existing undeveloped sites, again within the town site proper.
So put this in perspective against the 125 units that we're out to the market for now, and it's very much in perspective with the scale of these developments.
So the absolute maximum capacity is kind of around 1,000 dwelling units. We don't think we'll get that, but it gives you an indication that we really don't need to do a new neighborhood until we get kind of close to that level of investment. And I don't know that we will get that with the current suite of projects that are on the immediate horizon. So since mid-2013, so the middle of last year, we've held a series of housing workshops for Kitimat Council in particular. The first of those focused on the housing data, who the players were. The second one talked about the role of the local government specifically, defined the problem and held a kind of a workshop dialogue with council looking at potential policy options. 3 and 4, those kind of two primary workshop sessions, focused specifically on policy. And so we looked at a whole range of policy options and evaluated those on the basis of both potential timing and municipal cost. And so staff take on this was that you really wanted to select policies that work for your community in terms of delivering housing units in a timely fashion and really minimizing municipal expense, both capital costs initially, and in the case of some potential housing projects or housing approaches, minimizing kind of ongoing operational expense. So to have a housing department for your local government can be extremely expensive, and we didn't know that we wanted to move in that direction, at least not initially. So from the 12 key options, or 12 policy options, we've narrowed it down to these 6 priorities. And so Council has opted to move forward on all 6. Again, the check marks indicate work that has been completed, and the arrowheads indicate work that's ongoing. So density bonus, I think that's well in hand. We've got basically a draft policy now, and we'll have a long conversation with Council in the middle of October. The Coach House feasibility project, that's also well in hand. We have an intern doing I think what will end up being a very good piece of work on that, coming up with both kind of policy framework for selecting where that use can be accommodated in our community, and some design guidelines around specific individual buildings, what makes sense in certain locations, minimizing the visual impact for the balance of the neighborhood. And upcoming, of course, we have our business plan, or the housing action plan, and specifically also a discussion of community amenity contributions with regard to density bonusing, clearly one of the hot button political topics for the next municipal election, middle of November. Okay, so here's just kind of 2 examples, the next 2 slides are 2 examples of policies that have been adopted. The Strata conversion policy was particularly controversial, and it took Council a long time to kind of accept that there needed to be some movement in this area, and perhaps some limited tethering of developer opportunities to stratify individual units and individual buildings. So, the tipping point for that policy decision was really the number and the passionate story of people who were losing their homes, losing their long-term rental accommodation facilities as buildings were renovated to appeal specifically to the contract market, where people had fairly rich living out allowances and could afford to pay $100 or $150 a day for accommodation that met their unique needs. And so units that were unfurnished were furnished, cleaning services were established, leases, uneducated tenants were persuaded to sign leases, and in the case of British Columbia legislation, that basically removes the protection that you have from a month-to-month typical rental program. Okay. So I think we skipped over the secondary suite program, but that's okay. Now I think we're just going to wrap up with some closing comments. So I think that the overall message that we've learned is really, I think, as Elliott has spoken to you as well, there is significant and really, really significant impacts in advance of development. So people
just talking about these issues can drive prices and can drive availability. We have to be really aware of that when we speak in public or when we talk about our project's development plans.
So municipalities, it's critically to understand and respond to the kind of pre-FID market activity. So you want to be relatively cautious, but you have to engage. You have to engage the potential investors in residential real estate and in commercial real estate, and you certainly have to try and develop, I think, the best partnership you can with the proponents themselves. And the construction workforce isn't what municipalities plan or build for, but they have to understand and respond to the needs of that unique workforce as well. And so we've chosen to do that by siting a fairly large construction camp reasonably close to our downtown core, so those individuals can access the downtown core on foot. We will have an appropriate level of walkway connection and sidewalk connection to serve that market. And the legacy of that project will be a new multifamily site where we can focus longer-term development as we move forward. So you need to be ready, but not too ready, and it's really important to focus, I think, on capacity planning rather than infrastructure construction. And certainly, a key industry partner or two can really make a world of difference and be an important ally to help your community cope with this level of intense industrial activity.
So you guys have held back your torrent of questions. That was very polite of you all. But Josh, can we pass this back over to you and and also answer any questions that anyone might have.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to both of our presenters. That was an excellent presentation, and it's very interesting to hear both of you side by side talking about the same issue. I've heard both sides of the story many times, but not heard together just like that. And I think for myself, I could say I went quite a bit, and I'm sure many of the folks on the line could say the same thing as well. So thank you very much for that. We have just about 20 minutes left here to do questions, and there's two ways that we can ask questions today. The first is just ask your question on your line. And
yeah, I think given that we do have about 50 people on the line, I'm thinking that getting a perfectly quiet background and asking the questions that way probably isn't going to work so well. So I think it might be best if you just use that Q&A tab right at the top of your screen. You can type them in, and then we'll be able to read them out and make sure that they're clearly understood that way. So if you do have a question, just feel free to use that Q&A box up at the top. So we'll just wait for a few of those to come in. I think one thing that just stood out for me in the presentation was how closely and intimately LNG Canada and Kitimat is working together. And I mean, they're sitting side by side in a Vancouver office right now, which really demonstrates that. And I think for this large of an impact to a community, this kind of collaboration is so important, and that really does shine through. So we did just get a question in here.
Okay, so we've got a question for the housing that LNG will be organizing to tender. Will they be requesting construction of accessible housing for when the housing is released back into the market after use? So I believe this is a question for Elliott.
Can you repeat that one more time?
So I think what they're asking is, with the tender that LNG Canada is going to be putting out, are they going to also request for the construction of accessible housing to be released back to the market after use?
So without having my tender document in front of me, I'm going to give what I think is approximately the correct answer, and that is that we've asked for some units in multifamily developments to be accessible, but not all of them, in terms of full door width and accessible bathrooms and counter heights and things like that. But I think we have asked for a percentage of them to be, and given credit in the tendering process where they've put those forward. In our temporary accommodations in the workforce village, we will have a percentage there, around 5 or 8% of the rooms that are accessible. But we'll put them in a particular area near the transportation hubs. That means we have a few buildings that are specially equipped, but we don't spread it out everywhere. So given that that's a temporary facility that will come down later, I think that's acceptable. But having a number of accessible units available in the community is also important later. So the answer is yes, but not for every unit.
I think that the District of Kitimat recognizes that as something that we'll need to address in terms of policy changes in the OCP as well moving forward. So we're preparing to set some standards around that guideline, specifically in relation to the community amenity contribution policy and density bonusing policies too.
Another interesting bit is we're going to have a very large population of workforce, many of whom don't want to sit and watch sports all evening or go out and have a bunch of beers and eat. I think we're going to have a fairly good flow of volunteers into the community. We already saw that in the last year or two with the emergency shelter. A lot of engineering staff that have worked on the housing issues before. Getting this workforce involved in supportive housing and accessible housing, and in perhaps developing some more nonprofit type solutions is, I think, a great opportunity to keep people engaged and interested in the community, and frankly, to keep them from being bored, which is the worst enemy of any workforce accommodation. So another facet of how we can sort of benefit each other in this cycle.
Thank you, Elliott. And we have another question here from Andrea. So I think this one's also for you, Elliott. What is LNG Canada doing for workers who are already living in Kitimat? Like, what would you be doing to support existing health and existing social services in the community?
I'm not sure I'm actually equipped to answer all of those questions, but I will answer that by saying our very first, if you drop a pebble in the water and think of a concentric circle spreading out from it, that's how we'll be looking for employment. We want as many people as possible to come from the local community, and frankly, that makes financial sense too. But we also know that there are population limits. We could hire every able-bodied person in the community and still not be at the right place.
I think the short answer is that you'd be about 3,500 people short if you need 4,500 people.
So how do we help? We make sure we don't collapse the housing market for them, either by exploding prices or driving them through the floor. We try to make sure that we don't create a shortage in stock, and we make sure that we don't wreck the local quality of life by overwhelming the healthcare system, or the grocery store, or the child care, or elder care where that's appropriate. There are a lot of ways we can sort of contribute on those levels with both volunteers and through direct participation. But I can't think of our CX, our public relations people would hate me for this, but the very first thing is we can't wreck it. It's a great place in Kitimat, and if we cause the social structure or the economic structure to crumble, that's the worst possible thing we could do. We have to live and work in this community for at least the next 25 years. Some of these plants last longer than that. We're about to move into the house next door, and we have to make sure the community works. So that starts by hiring local, starts by making sure we don't ruin what's good about the current situation. And there's a lot of good.
Great, thank you. And so we have another question from Michael, and this one relates to, I guess, the coordination between groups like LNG Canada, District of Kitimat, BC Housing, other stakeholders who have an interest in housing, and talking about the long-term workforce housing that's going to be built and whether it can be recycled in the future for low-income, below-market housing after their completed and planned use.
Okay, so I think that's theoretically possible. I don't know how useful it will be in terms of delivering on the ground realistically. Kitimat's need for kind of affordable housing is now at the same time that construction camps are actually going in. So, it's one of those ones where you don't want to put the chicken before the egg. You want to have both. So it might be possible to recycle labor force housing as low-income housing in another community, but by then I think we'll actually have to have something already in place in our community.
Yeah, and temporary never turns out to be temporary in low-income and assisted housing. If you put people in or make accessible to them temporary units, there's a high likelihood that they stay there for 10, 15, 20 years. That means you're starting at a really not terribly acceptable long-term housing level to begin with. So I think
just in terms of function, it's almost like it's an SRO in its existing footprint without real full kitchen facilities. So there are some challenges in terms of repurposing the type of units that are going up in workforce accommodation facilities today.
So we are paying a great deal of attention in the community to efforts to either revitalize existing buildings or see what can happen in new structures in a creative way to kind of build up that stock. But we now have a little bit of time to do that, I think. I hope that answers the question. I'm aware we've made a commitment to remove this facility when we're done with it. So it's really about what gets left behind in the permanently built infrastructure inside of the residential areas.
Great, thank you for that. Just looking now, we don't have any questions on the board right now. Is there anybody else that would like to ask a question before the end of this session? So, and maybe with that, I'll also just remind you that if you're a member of the Planning Institute of BC, we are offering 1.5 organized and structured PIBC learning units for today's session, so make sure you claim that. Maybe I'd also like to just thank our presenters again for the excellent presentation, also our audience for staying in touch with us during the course of the presentation. I see most of you actually, or all of you, stayed online for the entire presentation, so you're also obviously very interested in the topic, so thank you for that. And also to our partners who, once again have put quite a bit of work into helping us think out these webinar sessions and contributing to them, and also helping them just make them work on a monthly basis. So we hope to put on a number of future sessions, and it's really the work of our partners that helps make that possible.
Great, and again, just like to echo many thanks both to Elliott and Gwen for that great presentation on behalf of the Economic Development Division. Thank you very much for everyone for joining in and your engagement and participation this afternoon. We just have one last comment from Rona, actually. Just thank you, great presentation. You're most welcome, Rona, and thanks again to Elliott and Gwen. I'll just flip the camera back over to them for their goodbye, and we will sign off for this afternoon. One other note, we will be sending out a quick survey questionnaire immediately following the webinar. It really helps us develop better webinars that help serve you and your communities better. So if you could take just a couple minutes to fill that out and give us some feedback, that would be sincerely appreciated. Once again, just flipping it over to Elliott and Gwen, thanks so much to both of you, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Bye, everybody.
Take care.